Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and I have been talking a lot about Apple's rumored March 8th event and what sort of products that we could probably expect to see at that event. Well, like all good Apple rumor seasons, it looks like we got hit with a last-minute March surprise, and there may actually be a few products that I thought weren't going to be at this event that might actually show up, and it might be something as exciting as an M2 MacBook Pro, possibly a new iMac, and I think the last Mac, which we kind of guessed already, is going to be a new M1 Pro and M1 Max Mac Mini. Probably won't talk about that a lot in this video because I already did a dedicated video covering what I think we can expect for the M1 Pro / M1 Max Mac Mini, so check it out there. But let's talk about these two other products. So let me get you through the timeline nice and simple here. So what happened here is Apple recently filed 3 new Macs at a Eurasian Economic Database with all different model numbers, A2615, A2686, and A2681. Now, this is standard practice for Apple. When they are about to announce a new product, this usually happens. In Europe, they have to register these products ahead of time. So here are the filings. Obviously, you can see that they are listed with kind of like these model numbers. It really doesn't tell us what Macs we can expect, right? Well, that's at first glance, because if you actually read into that database listing, Apple does kind of have to specify what type of product they're shipping here. So if you read into it, if you look at A2681, you can see that this is kind of registered as a portable personal computer, which would probably mean laptop. And if you go back to some of my videos talking about what products we can expect for March 8th, I basically said, do not expect any sort of laptop. Do not expect a new M2 MacBook Air, and do not expect a new M2 MacBook Pro, because I thought that transition for the M2 chip was going to take place much later, sometime in the fall, because I thought that Apple would want to get the rest of the Apple Silicon transition done before they started launching new M2 chips, right? It would be kind of awkward if Apple decided to, announce a new M1 Pro Mac Mini and a new M2 MacBook Pro. That might just go over some consumers' heads, might be a little bit confusing for them to parse out which one is better. And then you have to come to people like me and watch my videos for me to go, well, this one's better at this one's better at that. So I thought Apple kind of wanted to avoid that situation, but it might actually look like we are getting an M2 MacBook Pro. Now, I don't say this based off of just this filing. Apple has filed computers in the past, and people have gone crazy going, okay, it's going to be at this event, it's going to be, released next month, and then Apple basically waited another 6 months before they actually launched the product from when they filed it. There's no set rule in this, database filing that just because they registered a product now that they have to release it within the next month. So we can read into it that these products are coming. They're probably coming this year, but you can't just immediately go, okay, well, these products are definitely going to be at this event next month. However, we have an actual last-minute leak that an M2 MacBook Pro is coming. And this is from the same person who said at the last possible minute with the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro that they would feature a notch in the design. And no one else at the time was even remotely saying that these computers were going to have a notch in them. And then when we finally saw that Apple announced a MacBook Pro, and when they're showing off the renders going on screen, the notch was there. So that was a last-minute leak that I thought was dead wrong. When I heard that there was a notch, I went, I don't think Apple would do a notch on the MacBook Pro, and I was wrong about that. And now this same leaker, let me look up his name. I think it's pronounced Duan Ri. He basically is saying that Apple is going to launch an M2 MacBook Pro, and it's not going to look any different. So it'll look the exact same as the 13-inch. It won't have a notch, and it will still even retain design elements like the touch bar. Now, if you were to ask me, without this person specifically saying that, if I thought the new M2 MacBook Pro would retain the same exact design and would still come with a touch bar, I would say no. I would say that sounds bogus to me, because Apple obviously just got rid of the touch bar on the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro. That is a feature they are not going to explore with future Macs. And I think if Apple was to release any new Apple Silicon Macs, they would want to feature it with a new redesign. I thought the first M1 Macs would be like one-offs using the old design of Intel Macs, so Apple can go, look, it's the same exact design, all we did was change the chips inside of it, and look how much better they are than Intel computers. and then every Mac after that would feature some sort of redesign, which is basically what we've seen. The original M1 Macs all look the same, and then every M1 Mac or M1 Pro Mac we've seen after that, like the 24-inch iMac and the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, they have looked quite different. So this rumor, or leak, or whatever you want to call it, is surprising. Now again, I have to do my best to kind of guide you to what I think is going to actually happen, and this can't be ignored, I think. I think the information here coming from this source, someone who correctly predicted that a notch was going to be on the MacBook Pro when no one else was saying it a week before the event, and now we kind of have a similar situation here where, the rumor is that Apple's going to hold a March 8th event. This is the last possible second to report on things, and they are saying an M2 MacBook Pro is coming. So I'm going to say that this can actually happen. We might see an M2 MacBook Pro at this Apple March 8th event. The only problem is it doesn't really sound too exciting. It's going to be the same as the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro we have now, just with an M2 chip inside of it. So maybe that's enough to get people excited. I mean, at least it's a spec bump, and we're not waiting until the end of the year for Apple to release a spec bump laptop. And if you look at the current lineup now of the M1 MacBook Air all the way up to the M1 Pro MacBook Pro, that M1 MacBook Pro is in a very awkward position. It doesn't look like a good value right now. It's kind of one of the Macs you should probably avoid buying, and you should probably go for the M1 Air or just go all the way up to the M1 Pro MacBook Pro. If Apple releases an M2 MacBook Pro, well, maybe they make that laptop a little bit more of an attractive option because it's actually sitting in between the performance of the Air and the M1 Pro, and it might actually have some advantages even over going for the higher priced M1 Pro MacBook Pros. Because it's using a lower powered M2 chip, this thing can still be a champion at battery life, and it can run much cooler. And, it'll get performance improvements if it's carrying the first M2 chip. And it'll be weird in a way, too, because if this is Apple's first true M2 Mac, there's not going to be that much hype around it. The hype for it will be the M2 chip itself. We'll learn a lot about the M2 chip, and that'll be exciting because I've always wanted to see what Apple will pull off with their true, next generation of Apple Silicon. And we'll see that there with the M2 chip. But in terms of design or wowing us with like a new redesigned M2 MacBook Air, the M2 chip is not going to carry that hype. It is just literally going to be, look at what this M2 chip can do in the existing body of the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Not even going up to 14 inches, not even getting a notch. The 13-inch MacBook Pro, 2 Thunderbolt ports, and a touch bar. Yeah, touch bar, I guess, is going to live around for a while longer if you're a touch bar fan. So just to clarify, is a 13-inch MacBook Pro coming at Apple's March event? It's maybe, but I think it's leaning more towards yes at this point with the information we have presented. Again, I can only present the information, check their past predictions to see if they came out okay, and then I can relay that to you and give you my thoughts on it. So that's where I'm at right now. A week ago, I would have told you there's no way it's coming, and now we're at a maybe. Maybe this is coming. Now, there's 2 other filings, right? Obviously, I told you about the M1 Pro and M1 Max Mac Mini. I still think that's coming. And actually, we got a recent report out from Mark Gurman from Bloomberg, who basically said to expect 2 new Mac Minis this year. So it looks like we're actually going to get this M1 Pro Mac Mini and an M2 Mac Mini. But now if we're getting an M2 MacBook Pro, maybe that throws into question exactly which Mac Mini we're getting. Maybe it is actually just an M2 Mac Mini, and then the M1 Pro and M1 Mac Mini will wait till later. This is so confusing, but I really hope it's the M1 Pro Mac Mini. I'm a little more excited for that one because I actually want a professional class desktop from Apple as an option to go with, and I hope the M2 Mac Mini is later for this year. But the other filing, right? I said 3 Mac filings, there's 1 more. Now, like I told you with that other filing, it was listed as a portable personal computer. These other 2 listings are listed as desktop computers. So these are 2 new desktop computer filings from Apple. Maybe we'll get, like I said, an M2 Mac Mini and an M1 Pro Mac Mini. That would be so confusing, but maybe we'll get those. But I think there's actually a chance we might see another Mac at this event if indeed we are getting an M2 MacBook Pro. So if Apple is ready to launch the M2 chip and they're ready to start spec bumping up some of these computers, obviously there's a rumor that a redesigned MacBook Air is coming, and I guess they wouldn't announce a spec bump to the M1 MacBook Air, right? They want to have that redesign. Maybe that redesign isn't ready to go. So what other computer could that be? Well, look behind me, the 24-inch iMac. Now, there was a lot of rumors leading up to this March 8th event that we would see a redesigned iMac Pro with a mini LED display. But then, again, like a month ago, Ross Young basically came out and said that his sources in the supply chain were saying that the mini LED display that was slated for that 27-inch iMac Pro, basically Apple was having component issues getting all the orders in. So they were looking at shipping those components for the mini LED display basically around June, around WWDC time. So Ross Young basically said, yeah, the iMac Pro that he reported on that was coming in March is being pushed back sometime to the middle of this year. Again, probably sometime in June around WWDC. And we would get the iMac Pro with the mini LED display then. Well, then some people started speculating. Well, maybe we'll get a bigger size 27-inch iMac without a mini LED display, and then Apple will give us two different size iMacs like they've kind of done in the past, right? They had the 21 and 27-inch Intel iMac. In fact, you can go ahead and buy that 27-inch Intel iMac today. So maybe Apple is going to replace that 27-inch Intel iMac with an M1 version of a 27-inch iMac. Well, I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like we haven't heard any rumors about 27-inch panels. But then again, maybe we wouldn't. Maybe they would use the same 27-inch 5K panel that is already in the 27-inch Intel iMac, so there wouldn't be any new reports filing for that panel. But I also think that if Apple is indeed coming out with an M2 MacBook Pro, and they're ready to show off this M2 chip in an existing design that's as old as the 13-inch MacBook Pro, then why wouldn't they start to spec bump every other computer they sell? You know, last spring is when we saw the M1 iMac. Now, that was released in April, but it's almost a year old. So if Apple was to just give us a simple update for the 24-inch iMac and then just put the M2 chip in it, and that's basically it, well, that would be fine because it would be the same price. And then we would get a spec bump. With M2, we get more power for the same price. So why wouldn't Apple do that at this point if they're ready to show off the M2 MacBook Pro? So that's my thinking here. I think if Apple is ready to go with these 3 new filings for Macs, this March 8th event could actually be pretty heavy in focus with new Macs. And I think that could end up being the M2 MacBook Pro, a refresh of the M1 iMac with an M2 iMac, maybe some new colors to change things up a bit, but probably, you know, feature-wise, the same thing, probably design-wise, the same thing. I mean, this is a whole new design they just released last year, so I don't think they would do anything radical to it quite yet. And then the Mac Mini, where I'm kind of questioning now, is this actually an M1 Pro Mac Mini or is it an M2 Mac Mini? Because if they are ready to show off these M2 machines and all they're doing is taking existing designs and putting the M2 chip in it, well, that M1 Mac Mini would be very simple to update as well. Just put an M2 chip in it and call it a day. Maybe there'll be 4 new Macs, but again, they only registered 3. So yeah, I'm kind of wondering, is this an M2 Mac event and the redesigned M2 MacBook Air is just the special one and that will get its own event or be featured later on sometime in September. So yeah, new Macs are coming. It might be 1, it might be 3. We will see. But either way, I'm excited. These last minute rumors and leaks always get me excited. I thought I knew the whole game plan for about 2 months now and everything's changed on me. So it's going to be exciting to see what we actually see at this rumored Apple March 8th event, or if we even get an Apple rumored March 8th event. But yes, it does look like we are getting some new Macs. So I actually want to know from you in the comments below. I always say that every video, but this time I really, really mean it. What do you think about these last minute leaks about a new M2 MacBook Pro? And do you think that we are going to basically see an entire M2 refresh besides the MacBook Air? I really want to know, do you think this M2 MacBook Pro with no design changes and still a touch bar, do you think that's actually going to be at this March 8th event? Or do you think these last minute leaks are just totally wrong? As always, I hope you found the video informative. And if you did, please leave me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, see if I don't know if I really took a stance here, but you want to see if these rumors turn out to be right or wrong and see my reaction to them, make sure you're subscribed. We will get to see that pretty soon, obviously. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.